So today is, let's make sure we have our dates and everything together. Today is April the 26th. April the 26th. And give us a quick second, I'll jump on the conference line. All right, welcome everyone on the conference call line. Thank you so much for joining us for our Sunday school lesson this Sunday. I'm going to go ahead and mute all callers, and then at the end of the lesson, I'll unmute all callers so that we can all talk and ask some questions. Okay, how you guys doing? Good morning? All right, all right. All right, so everyone online is now in listen only mode, and we'll go ahead and begin our Sunday school lesson. Let us start off with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this opportunity to come together to worship you, this opportunity to lift up your name, an opportunity to just study your word. And so we pray, God, that you would open up our minds and our hearts, that we might just grow in our understanding and knowledge of you. Bless right now, God, as only you can. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. Today is April the 26th. Our Bible study lesson, if you have the short book or the medium print book, is found on page 398. And the title of today's lesson is The Lord Loves Justice. Let's read our aim for change. By the end of the lesson, we will explain the hope of vindication for the righteous and faithful, desire, salvation, and restoration for God's people, and commit to making just decisions in everyday life. This is a continuation of the theme that we've had for the last couple of weeks that is admonishing us to and instructing us about how God sees justice and how God desires that justice would be the prevailing way in which his people not only treat each other, but the way society treats one another, a community of justice. And we'll delve into that a little bit once we get into the text, because I think in order for us to understand what God's justice is, we have to separate it from man's justice. Man's justice is quite different than what God perceives as a just and right society. So we want to, as we delve into the text, not just talk in abstract terms about justice, but if we do that, we miss the essential point that the justice that we have in our mind may be based on worldly things, may be based on our understanding of the operation of the world versus our understanding or knowledge of God himself. So we want to not only talk about justice, but in this lesson, we want to delve into what a just society looks like in terms of God's grand plan for humanity. So let's look at our in focus. In focus, it was the 35th high school reunion for Westside High School's class of 1967. Everyone was excited and ready to have a good time. Jaquie and Darrell were the organizers. As everyone gathered to make a toast to their present and future, Darrell asked if they could have a moment of silence and remember the two brothers, Reginald and Stephen Phillips. Everyone remembered how kind they were back in their high school days. After graduation, the brothers established themselves as outstanding men in the community, in their families, and in the teen club they started. As they were walking down the street just a few months ago, a car rolled past them, and shots were fired. Later, it was revealed the brothers were not even the intended targets. After a moment of silence, Jaquie and Darrell decided to make their announcements. They shared with everyone that a memorial plaque honoring Stephen and Reginald would be placed in the hallway near the principal's office, and a program to combat bullying and promote economic development for the high school and the community would start in the fall, and everyone was invited to participate. In today's lesson, we learn about God's promise to honor his people, even after hardships. How have you seen God bestow honor on his children in this world? Now, in today's lesson, it talks about honoring the children after hardship, but it also talks about restoring them to a just society. A society where fairness and righteousness in accordance with God's way and God's will prevail. A society that is idealistic in that it looks towards a time where all nations and all peoples honor God and treat each other fairly. And so in that society, God's people will be lifted up and honored. So it does two things. The text talks about the honor that will be bestowed on God's people, but it also talks about the redistribution, or should I say the re-envisioning of what society itself should look like and how people should treat one another. In our in focus, we see a story of a class reunion. And for many of us, after class, after we graduate, we go off to do good things, but there were two brothers who decided that they would stay in the community and do good work. And their work was laudable and commendable, and in some freak instance or act of brutality, some people were driving by and a drive-by shooting and shot these two brothers. And the class comes together to honor their fallen classmates. And I think it's particularly interesting in that they're honoring people who gave back to the community. And I think that's something that we always want to look at. It's not just that we are living life, but what type of life are we living? Meaning that these two individuals were held up with honor in large part, not just due to their being members of the class, because there were probably lots of people. This was the class of 1967. There were lots of people that tragedy had befallen. Certainly in a class of any size, there would have been deaths, there would have been tragedy, there would have been other things. But these two were picked out specifically for honor because of the work that they did in the community. I'm reminded of that old song, "Let the work I've done speak for me." And I think it's a challenge to all of us to ask ourselves, how do we not only believe in justice, believe that change should occur, but work to bring about the change that we desire? Because, oftentimes we talk about what we like to see or what we want to see change in our community, change in our family, change in our job situation, change in our marriage situation. But the question becomes, what are we doing to be an instrument of change? No, we're not replacing God. And yes, it is true, God can bring about the change that he desires all on his own. But are we operating inside of the will of God, bending the arc towards change? Or are we just standing by waiting on God to do it for us? What is our actions or our place in our communities, our homes, and our families to bring about change towards a positive direction? And it's those individuals that are remembered. It's those individuals that we hold dear. It's those individuals in society. We always talk about greatness. Greatness is not achieved by your material possessions. Greatness can not be achieved, and I'm talking about lasting, long-standing greatness. It can only be achieved not by position, but by the way in which we've contributed to the well-being and the prosperity of others. And prosperity is not, I'm not talking about financial prosperity, I'm talking about the prosperity in terms of helping individuals actualize their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations. So let's jump into it. As you know, we always look at things through three lenses. The historical is our first lens, then we have the biblical, and then we have the theological. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time today, since we've been dealing with justice for the last couple of Sundays, I'm going to spend a lot of time dealing with the theological today, because I think there's some theological questions that we all can delve into that will help us put into perspective some of what is going on in our society now, some of what has gone on when we talk about social justice, when we talk about criminal justice reform, when we talk about all of these issues that are pressing not just to the community as a whole, which it is, but also specifically to the African American community. I think there are some theological foundations and understandings and underpinnings that will help us advance not only our ideology, advance our theology, but to help us place ourselves in the proper position within our communities to be agents of change. In the text, we see that Isaiah is talking to the children of Israel. And it is a proclamation from God, but it is also a prayer. It has a duality. When we slide down into the 62nd chapter, you clearly understand that he's praying. He's not only prophesying, but in his prophecy there is a form of prayer that is also there. And in his soliloquy, he's giving it while the people are in captivity in Babylon. Now we understand that the people in the divided kingdom, the north was fighting Assyria, then they got taken off, or the one kingdom was fighting Assyria and got taken into captivity, and then Babylon came to power and took Judah into captivity, and then when that happened, all of them were reunited to some degree in captivity. And now they're back to the place where they began. They were formed and brought to great prominence in Egypt in captivity. They went through the wilderness. They got into the promised land. They established a great kingdom. The kingdom got divided into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. After the division, the kingdom had a series of kings. Those series of kings, some good, some bad, most not living up to the full measure of God's desire, led the people, and with the people's own consent and participation, back into captivity. First, one kingdom, and then the second was the second part of the kingdom, and both ends up in captivity under Babylonian rule, because at that time Babylon had swept the whole Middle East. They were, as we talked about yesterday, they were from all the way from Ethiopia all the way up into Asia, to Persia. They had swept the Middle Eastern area, parts of Europe, all the way down into Africa. They were the prevailing force. And in this particular text, Isaiah is talking to them while they are in captivity, and he's telling them about God loves justice. And one of the things that we see is God loving justice, but using an unjust people to take over and to punish his own children, to punish his own special possession. And someone can ask, how is it in this context that God can use the unjust to punish those who are more just than they? And as a matter of fact, this is taken up by the prophet. The prophet talks about it. But he says that while they were deserving of punishment, that he still had his hand of protection on them, and that he would still bring them back to a place of prominence. And in fact, as we read on, we learn that there is a return to prominence of the Jewish people. But in this context, I think we need to understand what led them into captivity was their abuse and mistreatment of those who were less than in society. We see it all throughout the prophets, the major and minor prophets, as they're talking and warning the people before they go into captivity that they have to cease their exploitation of the poor. They have to stop perverting justice, turning right into wrong and wrong into right. They have to stop taking advantage of widows and orphans and using the power of government to exploit one another. And you say to yourself, what has changed in all these years? We see the same scenarios of greed and corruption still pervading our community, still moving through our government and our business sector. You know, I was shocked when we were talking. You look at the news and you see they created a program for small business owners, and Harvard University with $1 billion. Now, mind you, I went to Harvard for a program there, and you know I have great love for Harvard, but they've got $1 billion endowment. Is it right for them to get small business monies? Is it right for Ruth, Chris, and some of these other companies? It's how we take justice and turn it on its head. How we pervert that which is right for personal gain. This is still prevalent today. We still see exploitation of the poor. It troubles my heart to think that we could ask grocery store workers to come to work. They are essential employees, but could refuse to give them the necessary protective equipment to make them feel safe as well as make everybody feel safe while they're in the store. It troubles my heart to see that we can ask men and women with families for profit to go into meat packing places and to stand shoulder to shoulder and not take seriously their concerns about their health. And how no one in the government can come to their aid and say, hey, this is wrong. Yes, they are essential, but they don't want to be exploited. And I think that the same thing can be said for the children of Israel, which led them into their second round of captivity. Instead of being the beacon of hope, the beacon of justice that God desires, they turned into all of the other, to be just like all the other kingdoms, where those on top, the crafty, the wise, took advantage of the less than, of those who were less than them. And in this instance, that's how they got back. But let's look, because I don't want to just talk about God's justice. I want you to turn, if you're at home, I want you to turn to Leviticus, the 25th chapter, the 8th verse. Leviticus, the 25th chapter, the 8th verse. See, when we talk about a just society, the children of Israel were created in order to show the world what a just and God-centered society would look like. Now, when I say just, I'm not talking about man's justice, because in man's justice, if you don't work, then you don't eat. Even if you can't work, even if you're disabled, they don't have, I listen to, Mitch McConnell say, let the states go bankrupt. Let them go bankrupt. So be it. We don't care about them. They're nothing to us. As long as I got mine, you get yours. And by any crafty means, by any form of deception, by any form of trickery or anything else, as long as I got mine, you got yours. You get yours. And if you can get yours, regardless of who you hurt, as long as you don't get caught, that's good. That's the world's justice. We accept that justice because that's the justice that is the prevailing theory in this world. But real justice takes into account that we are all God's children. And when you look into Leviticus, God lays out what he wants. Leviticus is the book where God is laying out for the children of Israel not only his desires, but how he desires that they would be different than all of the people around them. Let's look at this. Leviticus 25 and 8. In addition, you must count off 7 Sabbath years. 7 sets of 7 years, adding up to 49 years in all. Then on the day of atonement in the 50th year, blow the ram's horn loud and long throughout the land. Set this year apart as holy, a time to proclaim freedom throughout the land for all who live there. It will be a jubilee year for you, when each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors and return to your own clan. This 50th year will be a jubilee for you. During that year, you must not plant your fields or store away any of the crops that grow on their own. And don't gather the grapes from your unpruned vines. It will be a jubilee year for you, and you must keep it holy. But you may eat whatever the land produces on its own. In the year of Jubilee, each of you may return to the land that belonged to your ancestors. When you make an agreement with your neighbor to buy or sell property, you must not take advantage of each other. When you buy land from your neighbor, the price you pay must be based on the number of years since the last Jubilee. The seller must set the price by taking into account the number of years remaining until the next year of Jubilee. The more years until the next Jubilee, the higher the price. The fewer years, the lower the price. After all, the person selling the land is actually selling you a certain number of harvests. Show your fear of God by not taking advantage of each other. I am the Lord your God. If you want to live securely in the land, follow my decrees and obey my regulations. Then the land will yield large crops, and you will eat your fill and live securely in it. Now listen, I want you to go back on your own time and read Leviticus, the 24th chapter and the 25th chapter, as it talks about the year of Jubilee. In God's system, when the children of Israel came into the promised land, everybody was given land. There was no one who had to rent land. Yes, they fought for the land together, and as a result, they came in together. As a result of being God's children, they were all given assigned land. That was the land of your ancestors. You could not lose land. You could not lose it. Now, you may have sold it for a time. Somebody, you're in year 8 and you sell the use of it for 42 years. In the 43rd year, that land would come back to you. So wherever you were, whatever hardship had befallen you, God had, it's like in Monopoly. You ever played Monopoly? You get to a certain point in the game where one guy owns all of the land, and everywhere you stop over, they say, it's time to pay rent. And when you look at it's time to pay rent, you look up and he's got a hotel on Park Place, and you got to pay thousands of dollars of rent, but you don't have the money. Well, that might have happened to you once, but in God's plan, when the next season came around, when you got to that certain year of Jubilee, the table would be thrown up in the air, and everybody would be able to go back home to reclaim the land of their ancestors or their portion of it and have something to live on, to have something to hold on to, something to grow and produce. They would not be poverty forever. There would not be exploitation forever. It wouldn't be winners take all. It wouldn't be a system where the big began to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have a form of monopoly where big multinational corporations exploit those who they can, take away the livelihoods, and force into a form of captivity all who are around. Let's look at that's when we talk about justice in terms of government, in terms of economic, in terms of what God desires and set up for his children, we have to look at Leviticus, the year of Jubilee. Because when we see God's justice and his plan and compare it to the world's justice, then we see how far we've come away from what God truly desires. How far we've come away from the type of life that God desires for his children. You know, so I hear people all the time, we got to go back to work. We got to work. We want to work. And that's good. We should work. There shouldn't be any lazy bones in the church or in society. Everybody should work. But on the other hand, everybody should have vacation time. Everybody should be able to leave and take care of their children. You know, I hear the government arguing about whether parents need maternity leave. If you have a child, should you have to go back to work in 2 weeks? Is that the society that God wants? The husband can't get maternity leave? Is that the society that we want? A society that allows the employers to exploit, to take advantage? You get hurt on your job, and instead of the company taking care of you, the insurance company is trying to find a way not to pay the job's trying to find a way to get rid of you so they can hire somebody else for less. Is that the society that we see in Leviticus? Or is God's world a world of justice for all his creation? See, we have to remember we all were created in God's image, and he loves all his children. And when you mistreat one of his children, you are mistreating God. Let's look at this text. Let's jump into the biblical. That's the background. So let's talk about the biblical. Isaiah 61:8. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. He hates those who steal and those who do wrong. And let me not say it that way. He hates the act of stealing and doing wrong. He loves the individual, but he hates the act. And he desires that they would return to him. I will faithfully, and I gotta say this now, I gotta say this. See, we get confused, and and it's amazing that there's such misrepresentation of the church and what we believe. God hates robbery and wrongdoing. God hates sin. But that does not mean that he hates the individual. God believes in justice and punishment, but that does not mean that he believes in throwing people away. Balance has to be restored in the way in which governments administer justice. Because even though individuals have done wrong, God still loves the individual, but he understands they must be punished for their wrong. And sometimes we get into a mode of casting people in these childlike ways of saying they are good, they are bad. No, good people do bad things. People in hard times do bad things. God hates the bad things, but that doesn't mean that he hates the people and does not understand the circumstances they are in. And wrongdoing, I will faithfully reward my people for their suffering and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be recognized and honored among the nations. Now, he's talking to individuals who are in captivity. Everyone will realize that they are a people the Lord has blessed. Now, he took them into captivity. He took them into captivity because they would not treat one another right. They would not obey the law. But even while they're in captivity, he's saying that he's going to restore them. See, sometimes we think that God's trouble doesn't last always, even if it comes by God removing his his hand of protection from us. Our troubles, our struggles are only a temporary season. Their descendants will be recognized. Look, he says in verse 10, I am overwhelmed with joy in the Lord my God, for he has dressed me with the clothing of salvation and draped me in a robe of righteousness. I am like a bridegroom dressed for his wedding, or a bride with her jewels. Essentially what he's saying is that while they have been taken down, that's not the end of the story. While they may be suffering now, God will restore them, and he will restore them not only to a place of honor, but he will restore them to their central place. And the central place for the children of Israel was supposed to be to show the world what it meant to live justly under God. The sovereign Lord will show his justice to the nations of the world. Everyone will praise him. His righteousness will be like a garden in early spring, with plants springing up everywhere. His righteousness will grow and bubble up everywhere you turn. There will come a time where God's righteousness, where it's so pervasive on this planet that you don't have to create pockets of righteousness, but the righteousness will bubble up on their own, like the garden growing. The nations will see your righteousness. World leaders will be blinded by your glory, and you will be given a new name by the Lord's own mouth. He's talking to his children. Everyone, once again, he's saying that there will come a time where the desire of God for the creation of the children of Israel will finally be fulfilled. That, yes, they've been punished. Yes, they've been forgiven and brought high. Then they've been punished and they will be forgiven again and brought high. And there will come a point where his ultimate plan will be fulfilled. And that ultimate plan was to set in the midst of all the nations an example of what prosperity can come to a group, what type of life a group can live if they operate fully under the law established by God. If they fulfill the law in the Jubilee year, if they treat each other right, they will become a beacon, and other nations will look to them and want to do the same. They will look to them and glorify God and realize that man's way is not the right way. Listen what it says here. The nations will see your righteousness. World leaders will be blinded by your glory, and you will be given a new name by the Lord's own mouth. The Lord will hold you in his hand for all to see, a splendid crown in the hand of God. You see, they were created so that others would see Look to them and say, look at that group right there. Look how they treat each other. Look how they advance together. You know, I wonder, we talk a lot about civilization, and I always often wonder, what does it mean to be civilized? Civilization, by definition, has to do with the way in which we treat one another. And I believe when we read Leviticus, we see the ultimate roadmap or plan for a just society, a civilized society. Sometimes we think of civilization in terms of technology. But I wonder if these tribes in these rural, remote places who provide food and health care to all of its members, who provide the necessary education to all of its members, who deal justly with all of its members, who work collaboratively and collectively to ensure that everyone in the community is taken care of. Yes, they don't have cell phones, but do you need cell phones to be civilized? Yes, they don't have television, but do you need televisions to be civilized? Yes, they may live in huts, but do you need a mansion in order to be civilized? Yes, they may hunt and gather, but in their hunting and gathering, everybody gets to eat. In our working and factories, and with all of the excess we have, we see that we throw away more food than some countries even use. And you ask and you say, we're civilized. Well, how can you be civilized if you're throwing away billions of dollars worth of food every year just to prop up the prices and to prop up the economy and the agribusiness while there are children starving on the streets? Can you say that's a just society, a civilized society? I would argue that some of these nomadic tribes and these indigenous people who are in remote places are more civilized than us with all of our technology and capacity, because civilization is how you treat one another. And to be civilized is the root word is civil, meaning the treatment of one another. And technology has nothing to do with it. What difference does it make if you can go to the moon, if you can put a satellite into orbit, if you can't feed an orphan who's sitting right in the middle of your community? If you can't feed the homeless who are sitting right amongst you, right on the corners, if you can't provide housing and medical treatment to those who become addicted to the drugs that you allow, the government allow to be distributed. You know, it's amazing. How can we say that we are civilized? But what God is saying is that he's going to use his ultimate plan for the children of Israel was to show how a truly civil society, a society that takes care of its brother, a society that is built upon love and God's law, is one that elevates all components, and in that way all other people will look to them and look in awe of who God is and what God can do. And they will seek to replicate what God has done in his chosen people. Never again will you be called the forsaken city or the desolate land. Your new name will be the city of God's delight and the bride of God. For the Lord delights in you and will claim you as his bride. That was his ultimate goal. And what Isaiah is saying is that, yes, even though you're in captivity, God's providential protection is still upon you. That he will not allow you to be snuffed out by the Babylonians. He will not allow you to be dispersed such that you lose your identity, but that he will restore you because he loves justice. And you are a centerpiece in his restoration of a just world and a just society. Now let's look at this. I want to look at some of the theological. I'm going to put I'm going to do something a little different. We're going to talk a little bit about the theology. We've read through the text. But I want to talk about the theology, and to do that, I'm going to put the conference call back on talk mode where everybody can talk. Because if you have questions, just go ahead and chime in. Okay, so everybody on the conference call is in interactive talk mode at this time. If you've got a question, I can hear you. You can put it forth. But I want to talk a little bit about the theological, because there are a couple of terms, and I want you to ask questions if you have questions as we progress. First term I want to talk about is the difference between relativism and absolutism. Relativism and absolutism. Relativism, if you take a study of philosophy, is this notion that right and wrong are based upon an individual's perspective at any given moment. it is this type of interpretation of God and the Bible that leads us to having lots of people create justifications for anything and everything they do. As long as they can create their own rationale for why they do what they do, that makes it just. Well, when people interpret the Bible in relative terms, finding ways and deleting certain passages and including others, and when they make excuses or redefine the image of God in order to justify what they want to do, that's relativism. But that's not what the Bible is truly based on. When we acknowledge that there is a God, that is an absolute truth. And anything that flows from that absolute truth has to flow in a form that is absolutism. Christians are supposed to be absolutists, meaning that we believe there is a true right and wrong. Right and wrong doesn't change. People may change in their understanding, but what's right and what's wrong? It is wrong to enslave. It was wrong during slavery. It was wrong during the time of our founders. What changed wasn't whether it was right or wrong. What changed was the power and the ability of people to change corrupt and wicked institutions. It's not that it was right then, but it's wrong now. No, what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And there are too many Christians that are nowadays to be accepted, willing to alter what they believe slightly a little here, slightly a little there, in order to appease the world, in order to be accepted by political figures and social figures. Is the church really supposed to be accepted? Are we supposed to be accepted in that way? We believe what we believe. If you choose to believe it, come on. If you choose not to, go on. We should not be subject to relativism. We are an absolute. And here's the thing. I like this quote that Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us, that even when things are wrong, he reminds us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Change takes a long time, but it does happen. And I think that as more people see the impact of wrong, as wrong, they used to say back in the day, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And I believe that corruption and the wickedness of this world operates in the darkness, in the secret places, and once they are exposed to the masses, God's truth through the power of the Holy Spirit is revealed to mankind, and wrong cannot, those companies that took those loans, knowing good and well they weren't designed for multinational billion-dollar corporations. When the world found out and they were truly shamed, then some of them said, we got to get this back. It's too hot in the kitchen. See, sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And when time elapses, a lie cannot be hidden forever. And as the truth bubbles up to the surface, don't you know that God's wing bubbling up through the hearts and minds of all humanity will speak towards what is right, will lean and bend the arc of the universe towards what is right. I believe Martin Luther King is right in that regard. And when I say that, I introduce that concept because when we look at bending, we don't look at an instantaneous correction. Sometimes people are waiting for an instantaneous correction to all that is wrong. But when Martin Luther King talks about it, he talks about a bending, meaning a slow modulation or movement away from what is wrong towards what is right. Now, if you're on the conference call, now I've got you on interactive talk so you can ask questions, but we do need you to put your phones on mute. We do need you to put your phones on mute, if you could. If you're listening, I appreciate you on the conference call and listening on the live stream. However, you have to put your phones on mute. You have to put your phone on mute. Somebody, if I can hear you talking, I think that's Sister Trotter. That means you're not. Okay, there you go. All right, you're on mute. Whoever it is. And you can be on the live stream and on the conference call at the same time. You just have to mute your cell phone so that the feedback loop, doesn't create by your telephone and your TV set exchanging audio at the same time. So listen to this. Eschatological hope. Let's talk some more about theology. Eschatological hope. The term eschatology is the study of end times. And we talk about our hope, we're saying it's the hope for what will come. When we read Revelation, when we talk about passages like this in Isaiah, we're really talking about eschatology. Eschatology is that study of what will happen when this world passes away. Jesus says he will come again. Well, what does that look like? When we look at the Olivet Discourse in the New Testament, and we look at the book of Revelation, and when we look at the prophecies of Isaiah and some of the other prophets, we see they're talking about a perfect society. They're talking about a world that has not yet come, but a world that is in its purest perfection and its purest sense of what God desires. Whenever we see those pure, perfect depictions of what will happen, and you can read it in this text, we know that this is an eschatological text because it's talking about all the nations and all the leaders looking towards God. When will that happen? Unless Jesus Christ comes back again. We're talking about a world without the corruption of leaders and the corruption of society. That's an eschatological text, meaning that it's talking about the final end times. Now, when Jesus shall come and set things proper. But what I don't want you to do is to think that because that is, and this is one of the mistakes that the church often makes, and it's one of the criticisms that the community has against the church, is that the church has an eschatological view, which everyone should have. We should all have a view of what will happen at the end time. Where is this thing ultimately going? Because once we put that into perspective, then we can place ourselves in the proper position to be on the side of right. But what that doesn't mean is that we sit in the church and we sing and we do nothing to help bring about right in the here and now. So how do we have our eschatological hope, knowing that in the end God will right this ship once and for all, but in the same time say, while we're here now, we got to make a way for us to get to that point. We can't just sing about what will happen in the by and by, because that will happen in the by and by. But what do we do in the here and now? And that's one of the major criticisms of the church, is that it becomes too eschatological, meaning that its focus is too much on what will happen way out into the future, and in knowing that, they tend to lack or tend to, tend to overlook their responsibility to the community and their responsibility to the next generation to fight for what is right in the here and now. Does that make sense to y'all? Does that make sense? That makes sense to anybody? We look at this in terms, and there are several theologies that advance this. One of those theologies is a foundation for black theology, which is called liberation theology. I'm going to say that again, liberation theology. Liberation theology did not, a lot of times we talk about it, but liberation theology is different from black theology in that liberation theology was created not in America, but it was created in South America. It was not created in the United States. It was in South America, and it was created or advanced and developed by Latin American Roman Catholics that emphasizes liberation from social, political, and economic oppression as an anticipation of ultimate salvation. Now listen to this word. As an anticipation of ultimate salvation. Meaning that we know that God will come at some point and provide ultimate salvation. But in the meantime, he has called his people to stand for what is right. And we should make that stand and work towards that ultimate salvation by taking our role in society in the here and now serious as agents of change for what is right. That's what Martin Luther King was saying. Martin Luther King wasn't saying that he didn't believe in eschatology or that God would come and right all the wrongs. What he was saying is, until that day, it is God's people's role and responsibility to move and push and work towards what is right in society. Yes, we're waiting for a day when all the nations will look to God's perfect and holy city and follow suit in their righteous treatment. Yes, we're looking for a day where God will restore Jubilee. But in the meantime and in between time, what do we do as Christians to move the moral arc of the universe, to help bend it towards justice and equality? We have a role to play. And these two concepts, eschatology and liberation theology, are not in conflict, but they go one hand in hand. It is the pushing. It is the collective action. It is the power of the church and people of conscience and God-centered people that shows the world what is right and helps to move the world towards what is right. And I'm a firm believer. Now this is me talking. I'm a firm believer that God wants us to do our part. Not to take his role, but there are things that we can do. You know, I think it was Councilwoman Gray that came out and did a presentation with the lay organization on the census. Now, question. How many of us fill out the census? I used to be a census worker. I used to be one of the guys when I was in graduate school working on my master's. I would go out and knock on doors for the census. But the question is this. How come we can't do our part by filling out the census? Can you blame somebody else for your downfall if you have not taken the necessary steps you want to blame that your community is not what it is, but what role have you played? And I think the church has to stop talking about, I'm not saying getting into politics. This is not a political discussion because everybody's supposed to fill out the census. And in your community, your resources are associated with the census. So, what you say you want justice, you say you want equality, you say you want resources to take care of the downtrodden and the people in your community, but you won't fill out the census. They got to beg you, they got to go out to your house and knock on your door, and then they got to come back out, then they got to start calling you like Bill Collect to get you to fill out the census. Yeah, we have eschatological hope. Yes, we know that God is going to right the thing in the end, but what do you do in the here and now to make things better? Yes, folks talk about, I don't like the way the election went. All right. That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You may not like the way this election or that election went. You don't like who's in this office and that office. But let me tell you something. There are enough people who don't vote in every election to overturn every single election in the United States of America. It doesn't matter. Now, this is not a political statement. I'm saying it doesn't matter who or what. There are enough people sitting at home in any of these elections to turn them the other way. But they would rather sit at home and complain that it's not what they want it to be. But what is our responsibility in the here and now to move toward that perfect society that God will eventually bring about when Jesus shall appear? What are you doing in the interim? Now let's go back to, you heard the talent. When he appears, guess what? You got some talent, didn't you? But you buried them in the sand. And then want to complain about this thing or that thing. No, you've got to use the gifts that God has given you in the here and now. Use them not to promote injustice, but use them to bend the moral arc of the universe towards a better place. Not just for yourself, but there's a generation that's coming behind us. There's another generation that's coming. And if Jesus don't show up before they come to adults and have to deal with this world, what have you done to make it better? You're going to say, well, we're going to wait till he shows up and we just going to do nothing. We're just going to sit in the church and sing until he shows. Is that really what God wants us to do? Or does he want us to do our part? To get out there and register people to vote? This is not political. There are some people who are trying to stop folks from voting. Because that's their way of winning elections. If fewer of y'all and us's come out to vote, then they feel like they can win. But I'm not telling people who to vote for. I'm saying it's your responsibility to bend the arc of the universe towards righteousness and justice by getting off your... Go out and vote. That's all. All right. You got any questions? Y'all got any questions for me? I'm here. If you're on the conference call line, you got any questions? This is your time to ask them. Yes. us to do, and we have to educate ourselves and do it. You know, we say we want so-and-so to get elected. Well, are you out there making phone calls for so-and-so? Are you knocking on doors to help so-and-so get elected? Are you giving money? Yeah, I know going to the beauty supply. Y'all stop going to the beauty supply store during COVID-19. Stop going to the beauty supply store. Stop going to the beauty supply store. We talking about all of what's plaguing our community, all of our folk up there in the hospital, disproportionately represented, and they still going to the beauty supply store. What is it they're selling in the beauty supply store that you have? They're not selling water. They're not selling first aid kits. There's no food. Is there a grocery line aisle in the beauty store? I haven't been in a long time. What is it that, you know, we've got to take some personal responsibility for our own communities. We've got to, and I'm not saying that means we let others off the hook. No, we got to hold them accountable to the utmost for the lack of testing, the lack of treatment and health care in our community. We've got to hold them responsible, but we don't need to be standing in the beauty supply store either. Because it's hard to make the comment that you want justice while you're contributing to your own demise. Well, y'all got any questions? Because I don't want to. Y'all got any more questions? Any more questions? Anybody got one? All right. Well, let's close out. We'll prepare for our worship service, which starts at 11 o'clock. And you can stay on the conference call line if you're on the conference call line. If you're on streaming, the stream will drop down and then it will come back up. But if you're on the conference call line will not drop down. It'll stay live until the service will just go ahead and merge in. So you don't have to hang up. You can just put your phone on mute, go get you some breakfast, go do some other things, and then come back and we'll still be on, okay? Also, just for your information, we're going to be using a little new technology with the conference call line, which will hopefully bring in all of the soloists and all of the others, the piano and we got a little new technology that we're trying to integrate. So bear with us during the service as we kind of calibrate everything. But just hold on. Let's close out with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord. We love you. We worship you. We glorify your name, God. We praise you, God, for this opportunity to study your word. And we ask now, God, that you would just continue to walk with us, open up our eyes that we might be able to see clearly, not just only what to do in our lives, but what you would have us to do in the community, to serve as agents of change and for justice everywhere we go. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.